we have another fantastic keynote session this afternoon, and I'm very honored to introduce the moderator for this afternoon, who is an old friend and somebody that renewable folks know very well, Dan Shugar, the CEO and founder of Nextracker. Dan has over 35 years of experience in our industry. His company has built over 1,000 projects. They are the largest racking manufacturer in the world. They have installed over 70 gigawatts of photovoltaic systems. They haven't installed it, but provided the materials, right? It's a technology company. Dan is a very visionary leader in renewable energy. He fosters a culture of empowerment and mission-driven goals, high integrity organization, very ethical business practices, total leader, and he has also a lot of international experience. I saw, a couple of weeks ago, I saw him on stage with the Indian Prime Minister Modi in India. And anybody who hasn't worked with Dan yet, trust me, you're up to somebody very special who is also very close to my heart. The industry started a few years ago insourcing jobs back into the United States after a lot of racking was outsourced. Dan has just in the last 12 months built 6 additional factories over here in the United States to bring jobs back and have American-made content that can be provided for companies like ours. So we have the ability to have more domestic content in our system integration efforts. Dan, can you please come up here?
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Sure appreciate that. Thank you very much.
The second introduction should be easy after our lunch meeting. I want to reintroduce for the second time today Michael Regan, the administrator of the EPA. I think I can make this very short. I hope you guys have experienced Michael when we handed him the award during the lunch presentation today. Michael is 26 years in our industry in various government roles. I met him a dozen years ago when he was working for the Environmental Defense Fund as director or senior director. He moved from there to DEQ in North Carolina, worked for government for the Cooper administration as head of DEQ. And then 3.5 years ago, he moved to Washington, D.C. to become the administrator of the EPA for the Biden administration. Michael is somebody that I respect more than probably anyone, because even when he was just the director for the Environmental Defense Fund, he had a very clear vision on what he wanted to do. He always talked about environmental justice. He had a very strong social focus. He didn't look at environmental policies just in isolation, but he looked at the impact of these policies on society, and especially underprivileged parts of society. That focus has never changed. He's a very, very unique person that I think will go much further in life than even in his current role. I'm extremely privileged to call Michael a friend, and I want you to give Michael a warm welcome when he comes on stage.
Wonderful. It's so fabulous to be back again to speak at the Clean Tech Summit here at the University of North Carolina. I know I share the excitement and enthusiasm to see our next generation of leaders in clean tech here offering great ideas, thoughts, inspiration. Thank you, Professor Gongley and Mr. Wilhelm, for the opportunity to come speak. Nextracker was very honored to be a sponsor of this event. And I'm especially honored to have the opportunity to engage Administrator Regan in a conversation about the amazing work the Environmental Protection Agency is doing to advance clean tech policy, creating jobs, creating clean energy for us and our future generations. I'll start with Administrator Regan. The EPA's mission is to protect human health, the environment, ensuring Americans have access to clean air, land, water. Yes. With over 15,000 staff, there's a huge scope of responsibilities. Can you share now what are some of the topical areas you're most focused on as we move forward with the landmark legislation, with the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest single environmental legislation that's ever been accomplished?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you. This is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be able to have this conversation. And, you know, EPA's mission is to ensure that every single person in this country has equal protection under the law from a public health standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. And so, you know, 15,000 people, a huge remit. It's an honor to serve in this capacity, but there are some key areas that we are really excited to focus on. I think to the point you're making about historic legislation, thanks to President Biden's vision and leadership, we've got about $130 billion to really focus on some key areas, and I'll just name a few. First of all, when we think about water and water infrastructure, we have a very fragile system nationally, and so Congress allocated about $50 billion to EPA to really focus on ensuring that we deliver good quality drinking water to every single person in this country. And that is focused on infrastructure, improving the infrastructure, making sure that the infrastructure isn't poisonous, like these lead service lines that continue to serve too many people in this country. So we have used those billions of dollars to focus on removing lead service lines and ensuring that our infrastructure is solid, but not just solid for the current state, solid for what we see as the future pressures that climate change is putting on our water infrastructure. So that's an exciting space. You really have to deal with cybersecurity. You have to think about advanced filtration technologies that we're seeing to filter out PFAS. But we also have to do it in a durable way because we understand the threats of climate change. Speaking of that, climate change is a major remit for EPA. We're at the center of the president's climate agenda. Just yesterday, I announced the single largest technology standard in United States history focused on cars and trucks. We're going to take about 7 billion tons of CO2 out of the environment by looking at advanced technologies for mobile transportation. We're focused on reducing methane from our oil and gas sector, HFCs from refrigeration and air conditioning. And in a few weeks, we're going to unveil a power plant standard that looks at generation in this country and how we can curtail those climate pollutants. And I'll kind of end with what drives us at our very core, which is environmental justice and equity. Every single thing that we do at EPA is through the lens of environmental justice and equity. We believe that no child and no person should be left behind. So for every policy, every regulation, every grant, we are laser focused on ensuring that those who have been disproportionately impacted for decades now finally get a seat at the table, and not in a paternalistic way. The government doesn't have all the answers and solutions. We are listening to our communities and taking the considerations that they've had for decades and matching federal funds to that. So clean air, clean water, climate change, and justice, that's really the major thrust, thanks to the president's vision. And by the way, I will say this because I'm very proud of it. President Biden is the first sitting president to utter the words environmental justice during a State of the Union address. Not only once, but twice. He means it when he says, we are not going to leave any communities behind, and I'm very proud of that.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Administrator Regan, I'd like to follow up one of you just talked about environmental justice. And I was very inspired in preparation for our conversation today. I did some research, and I went on YouTube and actually watched a number of the conversations you had with folks and communities around the country that have been impacted as part of your environmental justice tour and fact-finding activities. I found that quite inspiring. Can you unpack some of the stories and some of the case studies you found in doing this program, and how did that then inform, from a policy standpoint, the direction that the EPA is moving?
I'll tell you, it has, I believe, been extremely eye-opening for the country. It was tough to sit in rooms like this or meetings in DC and really talk about environmental justice in a way that would reach people. And so we decided to do an environmental justice tour. I felt like since I have been bestowed the honor of leading a federal agency, it gives me somewhat of a bully pulpit. And we came up with this idea that if I could show up in strategic places in the country and convince CNN and MSNBC and the media to join, it would bring local press and others as well. Mm-hmm. So we branded it as an environmental justice tour. And I will tell you that the level of injustice in this country was even more stark than I understood. It definitely was eye-opening for my staff, and it blew the socks off of traditional media and social media. We decided that we would take a tour through Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. That was the first leg. And I will tell you, during one of the first events, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, and we were really looking at somewhat of a water crisis. I was invited to an elementary school to engage with students just about environmentalism and sustainability. We showed up to the school, and school had been canceled that day, and there were only 4 students left to greet me. And the students that were left that had not been shipped to other schools were there just to talk to me, because the rest of the students had been shipped away because there was no water pressure in that school. And I have to tell you, this was still during the height of COVID. So imagine us sending our children to an elementary school where they can't wash their hands and flush the toilets. I'll take a step back and say, when I got out of my vehicle to enter the school, there were so many porta potties lined up beside the school that I thought it was an active construction site. Those were the porta potties that those students were using on a daily basis during the height of COVID, because this elementary school had 0 to very little water pressure. Leave there, and we go through some of the parishes in Louisiana, where you see cancer survivors, members of families that have cancer. There was one gentleman that I met in his 80s. He took me to his sister's house. She had cancer. She was in her late 60s, early 70s. Her daughter had cancer. She was in her 50s, and her son had cancer. And they all lived in the same home in the same neighborhood that was about a stone's throw away from a chemical plant. We left there and we went to Texas, and we saw the same things. These neighborhoods that were backed up, true fence line communities, to facilities that had been ignored for decades. So I went back to Washington, D.C. with seeing that firsthand, but not just me, the cameras, CNN, MSNBC, people started to report about this. And then all of a sudden, environmental injustice is not a myth. Well, quickly the narrative in Washington, D.C. said, well, this is just about black and brown people. This is just a minority thing. So we decided that we would take the justice tour to Appalachia. So we went to West Virginia. And interestingly enough, in West Virginia, we saw some of the same struggles that we saw in Lowndes County, Alabama. Folks, in 2021 or 2022, I went to Lowndes County, Alabama, where close to 30% of the population has had or currently had hookworm, something that most of us don't think is prevalent or present in the United States of America. And so seeing these things firsthand, taking my staff with me to see these things firsthand, taking the media, it's sort of automatic that when you go back and sit behind that desk in Washington, D.C., and you think about environmental policy, climate, water, and air, you think about these children and these people, and you just work hard to ensure that any solution we come up with, it should benefit the least amongst us. And by the way, I'll say, I'm so thankful, and we were talking about this earlier, from a technology standpoint and a business model standpoint, there is absolutely no reason that as we do cutting edge things, that we can't do it in a way that benefits every single person in society. And so that's why I see clean tech, or just technology in general, and the market properly partnered with government regulations and policies, there isn't a problem that we can't solve in the United States of America. And that's something that President Biden says every time he gets a chance to talk.
I appreciate that. And I really encourage folks, take a few minutes. You can see these videos on the EPA site, or you can look at them on YouTube. You would just use in your search engine Administrator Regan Environmental Justice Tour, and you'll see those things. I'd like to just provide an editorial comment, if I may, on building on your theme there. You know, there's sort of a double win here. What we've been able to do at Nextracker, and Mr. Wilhelm mentioned this in the introductory remarks, is stand up, catalyze over 15 factories across the United States. These can go into communities where we're now providing economic value, that in building a socioeconomic base where the clean tech products, in our case it's solar tracker structures and control systems that are helping these solar power plants operate, are made within the communities, and the complexion of our workforce reflects those communities. So that as these plants are being constructed across the United States, it's not products made from faraway lands that are shipped across vast distances using diesel fuel and so forth and dumped into communities. No, that we're using high quality US raw material, in this case low carbon steel, electronics, and then making these in the area. So it's sort of a double win. As the legacy fossil fuel plants that are being phased out because they're not economic and they're obsolete.
Right.
You're not generating coal and pollutants that are coming from these other technologies. We're now building these plants, and just to rattle off a few areas where we've held public factory openings: Memphis, Pittsburgh, Sinton, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, Nevada, and other places across the country. So we're really seeing that create that, and my personal view is that's one of the reasons the country didn't dive into recession, as many pundits, economic experts were forecasting was going to happen. Oh, the tsunami of recession forecast a year ago, 6 months ago. It was due to policy. Things like the CHIPS Act.
That's right.
This building, semiconductor chips, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the IRA. This is helping us build these high-value clean tech products. You really bring it home for us with the environmental justice tour, and then the corollary to that is this economic value. So in that spirit, one of the things that's very inspiring that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act is the EPA's $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction. Now, as I understand how this works, there is a 20% tax credit that's additive to the 30% tax credit available for clean tech, which is really targeted for low-income communities and for the first time tax-exempt local governments. Can you unpack how that greenhouse gas reduction fund is actually working out in communities across the United States?
Well, I will tell you that when I got a call from Senator Bernie Sanders out of the clear blue, and he said, "Michael, can you handle $10 billion?" And I said,
Can you say that in Mr. Sanders' voice?
You know what, I would butcher it, so I can't. You had to be there. And this was when the legislation was in development. And he said, "I believe that we have the ability to level the playing field and ensure that every person in this country, especially our middle class and lower class, has the access to rooftop solar." Roof is the way he says it, rooftop solar. And so, I watched this process play out in Congress, and we ended up with $27 billion to focus on a greenhouse gas reduction fund. $7 billion completely focused on solar energy. Solar energy structures, tax credits, revenue streams that would allow for every person in this country, through partnerships, through local municipalities, through the private sector, every single home in this country could be competitive for solar panels, which is just amazing. Then there's the other $20 billion. $14 billion we are allocating through a competition to national nonprofits who are experienced in lending dollars and leveraging dollars. That'll be focused on states, cities, and municipalities who want to design green banks and other financial mechanisms to ensure that entrepreneurs, smart individuals, could compete for grants to demonstrate low carbon technologies. And then the final bucket is $6 billion. And we're kind of throwing this around billion as if it's chump change, but another $6 billion allocated to our community development financial institutions. Those who have experience lending in Black and brown and tribal communities, who can think about how to get that capital to these communities to also focus on low carbon technologies. It's just an awesome opportunity. I've had enough conversation with executives on Wall Street, whether it be commercial banking, hedge fund, private capital, venture capital. We believe that this $27 billion will bring hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital off the sidelines to invest in these very communities that we've been discussing. I think it's just such an awesome opportunity, and I think that there is an important lesson here that I want to articulate, which is there's a proper role for government, and that is to set policies and regulations to create certainty so that the innovators can innovate and the businesses can create jobs. This $27 billion, even though it's allocated to EPA, we're smart enough to say, let's create a competition for those who are experienced in handling capital to create organizations that can disseminate this money. And we just designed the metrics, and our metrics are you only get this capital if you can reduce the carbon footprint at a certain level in certain communities. And we'll be making that announcement in a couple of weeks. But this is another revolutionary idea of what happens when you marry public and private sector ideas, but let entrepreneurs, innovators, and technology just completely lead the way. By the way, do it in a just way so that we're all transitioning together.
I really appreciate that. I'd like to just amplify a few and reflect on a few of the comments you just made. This level the playing field is a huge idea. If you look back, because it sounds like a lot of money, as you mentioned, billions for this and that, that are coming from the IRA. But if you look back, and many economists have done this, you can see over the last 100 years, fossil fuels have received an inordinate subsidy that dwarfs what's happening with that's happened with these clean tech. So what we're talking about here is leveling the playing field. You have my commitment that if the great work of the Environmental Protection Agency can continue to level the playing field, Private industry will do the rest. We'll make the investments. We'll create the jobs. We'll further energy security, energy independence, and lower energy costs for homeowners, whether at their home or their business, and create a bunch of these jobs as we discussed.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate that.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay. Administrator Regan, prior to joining the Environmental Protection Agency, you served here in North Carolina as the Secretary for the Department of Environmental Quality. In this capacity, you helped develop the state's clean energy plan and move toward carbon neutrality by 2030. What progress in North Carolina are you most proud of, and what are the areas for further focus?
You know, I'm really proud of the state clean energy plan. I'll take you guys back just a little ways, and when I was asked to be secretary in 2016, 2017, Governor Cooper, just like President Biden, pledged to invest heavily in the ideas around clean energy and clean tech. And so he issued an Executive Order 80 that really gave me, as the Secretary of DEQ, the task of designing this state plan. And because of my strong relationship with people like Marcus Wilhelm and Tom Darden and others, we knew that the only way to design a plan of that nature was to use my secretary's position as an opportunity to leverage the power of convening. And this was probably the first time that the state had ever took on the task of creating a process that brought environmental advocates to the table, Duke Energy, the manufacturing sector, business leaders in the solar community, smart grid community, energy efficiency community, and we all sat down at a table and we sort of set some ground rules. And the ground rules really revolved around, hey, we all love the state of North Carolina, and we want the state of North Carolina to be globally competitive. What do we need to do to design a runway to ensure that the best ideas, technology, and clean energy could lead the way? Those conversations not only were a great stage for the exchange of intellectual ideas, and I think Marcus can attest to this, but we built relationships with cross-industry and environmentalists that we never thought we could do, which led to a lot of negotiating, which led to the clean energy plan. You know, I think that while there are always some things you can fix, and I'm sure there are probably some frustrations with whether or not the clean energy plan is being followed correctly, I will say that I've taken that concept and what we did in North Carolina, and when President Biden worked with Congress as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, he negotiated with Congress, and EPA received about close to $4 or $5 billion to create a carbon pollution reduction program. And I modeled the outcome of those billions of dollars behind what we did here in North Carolina. Now we have 47 states across the country. If they want to compete for these billions of dollars, they have to go through that process that we went through here in North Carolina. And again, we have 47 states that have opted into that program. The states that did not opt into these programs, I would argue, did for solely political purposes. And for those states that didn't opt into the program, we were smart enough to know that some states might not for political purposes. So once the state declined, we have made it available for the cities who want to participate. So we actually have participation in all 50 states. That is built on the concept and the idea that Governor Cooper came up with for Executive Order 80 that led to the constructive partnership that myself and folks like Marcus Wilhelm and others designed.
Really appreciate that explanation, and really the net result of that was the economy did really well in North Carolina. end customers, the data centers, Meta's type customers that need to power their facilities cost effectively, but also want clean energy, have been a major contributor to the state's economy. And what really helped at the end of the day, the goals to be fulfilled, was that the cost of solar and wind power have come down so much. Today, wind and solar are about the same in terms of cost. The cost of a new wind or solar plant is about 1/3 that of a new coal plant and about 1/5 that of a new nuclear plant.
That's right.
So we can, I really, it resonated with me when President Biden announced the IRA. He said, this is a clean energy plan, but this is really a jobs program.
It's a jobs plan.
At the end of the day, this is a jobs program, and it's something that also consumers benefit from. Minister Regan, can you please calibrate us on the tremendous progress that's been made reducing greenhouse gas emissions, how that relates to the agency's goals, and how you tie that to job creation here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think, you know, the best way for me to articulate that is, typically people think about EPA and they say you're the regulator and you design rules. And while that's somewhat true, what these rules really are technology standards. Essentially, we try to look at the potential of technology in the markets and where things are going, and we like to put a cap on emissions based on ushering in those technologies. And so, obviously, from a regulatory standpoint, we are very central to President Biden's greenhouse gas reduction goals. We started with hydrofluorocarbons, potent greenhouse gas, and we're going to phase out 85% of those pollutants within a 15-year window because of the regulations that we did in those first 2 years, or those technology standards. We also just issued a technology standard solely focused on methane, another highly pollutant greenhouse gas, where we actually partnered with industry. And the types of things that we are allowing in this technology standard has never been done before at EPA. After all, when you think about the potential of AI, you look at data opportunities. Quite frankly, I was in Houston talking with companies at CERAWeek, looking at robotic dogs and satellite technology. We have a technology standard, quite frankly, that's going to rein in methane emissions and actually save some of these gas companies money because they're wasting a lot of this product. Very proud of that. As I said, just yesterday, we issued a national regulation focused on reining in carbon pollution from transportation. And in a couple of weeks, we'll also issue another technology standard focused on the power sector, existing coal plants and new natural gas plants. When you look at what President Biden has done in the last 3 years, the historic actions he's taken, both from a regulatory standpoint and from the hundreds of billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act, there is no other president in history that has done more to advance the climate agenda than President Biden. And he is laser focused, as you've said over and over. He's laser focused in not looking at the climate crisis totally as a complete negative. He has also taken that negative and saying we can turn it into a positive by looking at the opportunities to grow jobs, to grow domestic manufacturing, to increase national security while we are tackling this climate crisis. And it's really been an interesting team to be on, because the president also said it's not just solely on EPA, it's not just solely on the Department of Transportation or Energy. He really has convened all of us and said, you will work together, leverage all of your resources, and help me save this planet for our young people.
I really appreciate that. When I spoke here last year, one thing I shared is sometimes the scope of a problem looks so huge, but we can find solutions. When I was a kid, there was this ozone problem. Like the ozone layer was going away. In Australia, people were getting skin cancer. We had to phase out CFCs. Okay, Guess what? That problem is largely solved. At that time, there was so much smog in Los Angeles, you couldn't see across a couple streets. Okay, catalytic converters came in. That problem was solved. And we can solve these problems we have now on this climate crisis through concerted effort and smart policy. What's happened with the technology is that it's allowed us to be enabling, leveraging, and get this done. And I can't really think of a better career, speaking to the students that are here, for you to engage your energies in. I've been incredibly inspired by this conversation, Minister Regan. The work by the EPA in smart policy lockstep with the U.S. Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, to onshore American jobs, create more energy independence, energy security, while we're protecting clean air, clean water, and reducing the impact of petrostates and petrodictators from overseas. I couldn't be more inspired. Thank you for chatting with us today.
Well, yes. I do want to say one thing, because I've promised to do this. Recently, I created a National Environmental Youth Advisory Council. It's a federal advisory council where we meet publicly at least 3 to 4 times a year, and it's occupied by young people ages 16 to 29. And they are seriously advising me on policy and regulatory issues. And one of the first things that they said to me, and they've asked me to continue to talk about it in this way, is that there's a lot of climate anxiety, there's a lot of trauma, and some of it is because of the words we choose to use, like crisis, and having conversations where the problems seem insurmountable. So I'm really grateful for the tone of the conversation we had today, because I want to let everyone know in this room that the President and I and this cabinet really see a bright future for this country and for this world, because those of you in this room, especially our young people, will have the ingenuity and the innovation to conquer this problem that we see now. So I want to say thank you all for being here and for listening and recognizing that those of us that are in this room will be the ones that are solving these problems of today. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.